Hello everyone and welcome back to the Lord of the Rings Iceberg. Today we're going to be talking about the second tier of the iceberg, which is sort of surface level stuff, but it's also getting a little bit deeper into stuff that you might not know. This is more for, I'd say, somebody that knows a little bit more about the book, they've watched all the movies, and they like to dig a little bit deeper into the lore. I like to call it the kind of waterline because as it sits kind of right in between like the stuff that everybody knows and then the stuff that kind of gets ominous. Today we're going to be talking about stuff such as characters have many names, the thinking fox, Gollum is a hobbit, Arda equals Earth, stuff like that. If you haven't already watched the first Iceberg video, I urge that you go back and watch it now, seeing as you'll kind of get a little bit more of a feel for what we're going to be talking about today. It also goes over some of the more surface level stuff that almost everybody knows. If you have already watched that and you're returning for another video, thank you very much. Without further ado, thank you very much for watching, and let's get into it. Up first, we have characters have many names. This refers to the more major characters in the book and movies having multiple names, some of them even like 2 or 3 names, such as Gandalf having Mithrandir and like the White Wizard, and Aragorn having names such as Strider. This can be contributed to many things. Most people say it's due to cultural differences. The world of Arda is quite vast, and each place that you go to is going to be very different. This is what would mainly make them have many names, seeing as a character that moves from group to group is often going to be called different things in different languages, and each person is going to have a different name for this person whenever they come into their group. It can also be said that each character, whenever they move to groups, they often act different, giving them different names and different sort of personas. Up next, we have the thinking fox. This refers to the fox that the hobbits come across in the Shire, and it tends to speak to itself. It also has very human thoughts. I believe he says something along the lines of, like, he exclaims to himself, "Hobbits," and then he says that since they're there, something must be going on, seeing as they're out walking around in the wild and not in some sort of shelter or community. Many people see this as being kind of out of place, seeing as not many animals in this world can speak. I believe the only animals that can speak are the eagles, and even then it's more of like a gesture or kind of like a sign language, I feel like, seeing as Gandalf has only kind of gestured to them. He's never really spoken to them. The fox itself is probably a nod to C.S. Lewis. It seems almost blatant the way that it is, seeing that in Narnia there is a talking fox that acts a lot of the same ways whenever he sees the kids. He exclaims to himself, and then he also has like a sort of talk about how it's so weird seeing the kids out walking around in Narnia. J.R.R. and C.S. Lewis having the same sort of lighthearted kind of kid movie book franchise, it seems to be why he took a nod at it. This is also kind of a reference back to The Hobbit, seeing as whenever The Hobbit was published, it was more of a kid's book. It was more lighthearted and charming than the Lord of the Rings at the end. Seeing as he never really had the full scope, he had sort of an idea of where he was going, but while writing this, he had the idea of the more lighthearted talking animal fox rather than what it will turn into. Up next, we have inspirations from World War I. Although Tolkien himself never fully admitted that he had taken inspiration from World War I believe he also kind of condemned it, saying that he didn't. His grandson, however, shed a little bit of light on how the war kind of parallels many of the things in the Lord of the Rings books and movies. And with him saying this, he did have some sort of credibility, seeing that he was always kind of near J.R.R. They seemed to have a very close bond, and they often talked a lot about Lord of the Rings things. Some things in the book and movies lend themselves to the World War I inspiration a little better than others. Seeing as like the trek through the Dead Marsh very, very closely mirrors the trek through the Somme in northern France. It has a lot of the same themes and a lot of the same feelings, and it almost sort of looks the same if you were to compare it side by side. Others of them being the sort of companionship that Frodo and Sam have along with the rest of the Fellowship. They all seem to have a sort of close-knit bond together, seeing as they're going against this looming foe. This also parallels the bond that the World War I British soldiers would have had fighting against the Germans. Seeing as it was such like an insurmountable foe, they often had to band together and trust each other with their lives. My favorite, however, is the industrialized type of evils that can go on in the Middle-earth world, such as Sauron's orcs. They often work as like non-stop grunts for his army, doing whatever he says and kind of blindly following it. This also fell in line with what probably a British soldier would have thought about Germans at the time. Alright, up next we have Khazd-dûl. Khazd-dûl is the formal language of the dwarves. This is a 50-letter alphabet that is written in the Surth script. The Surth script is kind of like the Nordic runes that you would think of whenever you see them in like Skyrim, and it's the kind of common Nordic rune. It also appears to be structured the same as a real-world language. The language itself was devised by Aule. Aule is the sort of creator god of the dwarves, seeing that he made them in his own image, and he is also sort of like their godlike figure. He also stated that he himself had made this language specifically for his children, i.e. the dwarves. And seeing that it is made specifically for them, it is often seen as a sort of mystery language, and it is widely secret. Almost no outsider knows of this language or has heard of it, and it has not even been recorded by the men or the elves of Middle-earth. Up next we have Gollum is a hobbit. I'm sure that a lot of you probably know about this. I believe it goes over this in the movies, and it's kind of surface knowledge. But all in all, this refers to the life that Gollum had before he was this creature that we see him as in the movies. Gollum, before this, his original name was Smeagol, and he was a sort of store, which the store was one of the first 3 hobbits that had come into existence at the time. It was kind of like a tribe. He was part of this tribe. Smeagol's story of becoming this sort of Gollum-like creature that he is starts whenever his cousin inherits the ring. Deagle and Smeagol being out on a fishing trip, Deagle falls into the river, and at the bottom of it is the ring. He brings it up and shows it to Smeagol, and Smeagol, being sort of greedy in his own right, instantly falls to the power of the ring. At this time, it was Smeagol's birthday, so he demands that Deagle give it to him as a birthday present. However, Deagle obviously refuses, trying to keep the ring for himself, and Smeagol ends up choking his brother to death. After this, he is quickly corrupted, and then he moves into the Misty Mountains, and over many years, he turns into what we see of him today. Up next, we have Arda equals Earth. While reading the books, it is often easy to fall into that this is just a make-believe land. This has no basis in real life. This is something that is completely made in somebody's brain and then put on pages. But however, canonically in the world of Middle-earth, it is seen that Arda does turn into Earth at some point. Tolkien's original conceit in the publication of these books and these writings that he had were that they were some sort of ancient script that he was translating for modern humans to read, seeing as the Elvish and everything was turned into English. It is believed in the Tolkien universe that after the Return of the King, all of the elves leave. This marks the end of their time in Earth, seeing as where they retreat to is now off the map. After this, the Age of Man rises. This leads to almost everything that we see that is mythical in the books and movies retreat down either under the earth or just hide from the humans. The Ents turn into trees after sitting for so long. The hobbits actively hide from men. It is said that they hide in their holes, and then whenever we go to sleep, they come out and they do their thing. And then the dwarves go into isolation, further digging themselves down deeper into the mountains that they are to never come out again. However, the Undying Lands are still stated to exist. They have just been wiped from records. And eventually, as time passes, the age of modern man seems to rise into what we know as the Earth today. Up next, we have Lord of the Rings Online. This is something I can really get behind, seeing as I'm a big World of Warcraft nerd. I love World of Warcraft, and Lord of the Rings Online is kind of what got me into it. Lord of the Rings Online was a massive multiplayer online game, which is also what World of Warcraft is, and it can also be compared to kind of Final Fantasy. It was made and released in 2007, and it was very popular for the time that it had come out. I believe it even rivaled World of Warcraft in some ways, seeing as how it has the sort of same playstyle of leveling up, starting a character from 1 and progressing and continuously getting better gear. However, it did soon go to the wayside after World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy tended to become whatever they are today, these massive megaliths of games, leaving Lord of the Rings kind of off to a niche. Lord of the Rings Online, although being generally dead to the wide public, it does have a very big cult following in its little niche groups. Up next, we have What is the Watcher? I had talked about this a little bit in the last video, seeing as it's one of the maybe nameless things, although this has never been confirmed by anybody. However, The Watcher seems to be a sort of nod to Lovecraftian horror, seeing as it follows the same sort of themes and outlines that Lovecraft himself had put out, seeing as it's like a massive creature that looms beneath the water that you can't see, but it only brings just a little bit of itself out. The full shape and size of the creature is not known to anybody, although it is said to be a sort of gigantic kraken that almost takes up most of the lake. This being was said to be created by Morgoth even before the rekindling of the stars. Up next, we have environmentalism. Environmentalism plays a major role in the world of Arda. JR himself puts in a lot of themes stating what would happen if you did not have a sort of cultivator to live with the nature, and if it were to fall to industrialization. This can be seen mainly through Saruman in the movies and in the book, seeing as whenever he starts off, he's a very wise wizard that is in tune with nature, but as time goes on and as he speaks with Sauron, he falls to this sense of industrialization and that he needs more power. Through this need for more power, he cuts down trees, levels land, and builds dams to hold back the water. After this, there is an uprise from the Ents. Seeing this as sort of a cautionary tale, Saruman building up, industrializing, and then over-industrializing, and then nature coming to take back what it wants. And this ultimately leads to him being overthrown and then him to his death. This is just one of the many examples that had this sort of moral outline in the book. However, I think this is probably the most important. Up next, we have Lord of the Rings is not a trilogy. Many people believe that Lord of the Rings is a trilogy and it was planned from the start to be a trilogy. However, this is not the case. Many of you know that it was created in a book of 3. However, the book itself was written as one big single novel that I believe was contained within 6 books within this book. It also had appendices that you could read through. However, due to the cost of publication, they weren't able to go through with this plan, splitting the single book into 3 books that we know today. And JR himself even stating that this was never what he intended. Up next, we have Barrow-wights. Barrow-wights are said to be shape-shifting creatures that are made of almost complete darkness. They are similar in looks to the ring-wraiths. However, they only dwell in darker places, such as the Barrow Downs. They're often said to be as cold as ice, even chilling the rooms that they enter, and they have glowing blue eyes that they use to entrance their victims. Using their shrill, shriek-like voices, they often lure people down into the depths of the barrows, and this is where they would entrance them, putting them under a spell, almost sort of like a paralysis. They would be laid down, not being able to move, but they would be aware of everything that is happening. After losing their will, they would often be laid in a burial mound and then slain with a sacrificial dagger. The hobbits themselves were also lured into this sort of trance until Tom Bombadil had came and saved them. Up next, we have goblins and orcs are the same. This one's kind of a shorter entry, seeing as they're from the same sort of family, so it's kind of common knowledge that orcs and goblins are the same. The term goblin and orc is often used interchangeably. I know in the Hobbit books it is stated that they're all goblins, but this is also more of a childlike nature, seeing as goblins are more associated with smaller things and children. But in the later books it is also seen being used interchangeably with the word orc. Goblin, the word itself, is also seen as a translation in the Hobbit books. However, the word orc is translated from the language of Rohan, literally meaning foul people. Later on, this is also used interchangeably with orc and goblin. Up next, we have Gandalf is resurrected. This is something everybody probably knows of, seeing as if they've watched the movies. But after Gandalf is dragged down from the Balrog, they fight for many days, fighting from the very bottom of the mountain up and up and up until they get to the very top peak of the mountain. Here at the top peak, they have a multi-day battle between the two that is hand-to-hand and with the sword and staff. This would be the final battle in the life of these two creatures and people. Gandalf, though, being the first to defeat the Balrog, later after this fight he succumbs to his wounds laying there on the floor. Rather than dying like a normal human would, Iluvatar picks his spirit directly from the universe and takes him to himself. After speaking with Gandalf, Gandalf is returned to his body, seeing as it was such a valiant and sacrificial death. Iluvatar believed that if it was great enough and he was needed back enough, he would be returned to his body, seeing as he put him back as the White Wizard. Iluvatar making Gandalf the White Wizard and resurrecting him also saw that it was fit that Gandalf got some greater power. This power would later be used in the books and the movies to rally the hobbits and the Fellowship into completing their quest. Up next we have the Old Man and the Two Towers. This is sort of a mystery, and this is also something that I've kind of glossed over until I started looking for this iceberg. I guess I always thought it was just Gandalf. I never really thought into it enough. The whole story starts in the chapter Riders of Rohan, whenever Gimli and the group see a man in white with a pointed hat standing at their fireplace. The white robes and hat often being associated with Gandalf, they all thought it was Gandalf. Once he is shouted at by Gimli, the figure runs off into the woods and retreats forever. As far as the Fellowship knows, they never see this person again. However, Gandalf himself completely denies that it was him. It is also weird that in the scene whenever Saruman is on top of the tower, he never recognizes anybody in the Fellowship, seeing as you'd think he would if he was the man in white. Same with Gandalf saying that he had never ever been a man in white with a robe. This is where the sort of mystery takes place. Most people certainly believe that it is Sauron. However, I don't really know about this, since Sauron is never seen wearing a pointed hat. This is very Gandalf-y. Leaving the same way that it started, a huge mystery. No one has been able to explain it to this day. Up next we have what happened to the Entwives. This one is very cut and dry. The Entwives were appropriately named the Wives of the Ents, and they were often seen as gardeners of Fangorn Forest. They were also seen as the keepers and cultivators of the forest, seeing as they'd often defend it and they'd often water the plants and walk around from tree to tree making sure everything was okay. Their disappearance is closely tied with Sauron, seeing as in the Battle of the Last Alliance he sort of glasses this area. During this battle, he uses the fire and the flames to scorch this earth where the Entwives live, leaving it a flattened and burned, desolate landscape, killing every bit of flora and fauna that had been within it. And when the Ents returned to find their wives, they were met with nothing but a barren wasteland. They would later on go to keep searching for them and keep going to battle for them, even though they did not know the fate of what had happened to their wives. Later on, they would settle down and then become normal trees as we know them today. Up next, we have The Lord of the Rings Conquest. The Lord of the Rings Conquest was a game that was released in 2009, and it was playable on Xbox 360, PC, and PlayStation. It was an action fighter style based game where you could play as many of the characters from the Lord of the Rings series. Seeing as it's derived from the movies, a lot of the character and player models are used from the movies rather than their description in the book. A lot of the gameplay mechanics are also very similar to the older sort of style of the Star Wars Battlefront series. This made the game very, very well received, seeing as it was kind of a reskin of what people had already loved, that being the Star Wars Battlefront games, but it was just set in the Lord of the Rings universe. This game featured many game modes such as Conquest, Capture the Flag, and Hero Deathmatch, which is very comparable to the deathmatch that you could play in the Star Wars Battlefront, the Hero Clash. Up next, we have a very sort of creepy entry. The entry of Aragorn and Arwen are related. This refers to the unsettling yet true fact that they are actually blood related to each other, seeing as they are very, very distant first cousins. Their family tree can be tracked through the line of Elros and Erendil, placing them as first cousins, I believe. The link can be made through Aragorn, seeing as he is a king of Numenor, and if you follow his line all the way back up, it can be traced back to Erendil. Erendil, of course, being the father of Elrond and Elros, and Elrond being the father of Arwen, which would in turn make Elrond Aragorn's great uncle, which would also make Arwen his cousin. Up next, we have werewolves. Werewolves are a sort of mythical being even in the land of Middle-earth. Their stories and the even thought of them is often passed down just by oral tradition. Folk tales being told for hundreds of years about these creatures called werewolves. They were ginormous worms that lived out in the middle of the desert. These creatures were very briefly mentioned in The Hobbit. They were said to be giant worms that dwelled down way far to the east in a place called the Last Desert. It is not well known if these are an actual race of creature or if this is something that the hobbits had made up, seeing as it doesn't really appear a lot of other places besides in hobbit folklore. Seeing as not much is known about them, it is speculated that they could transform between human and worm, seeing as the prefix were often means man. However mysterious these creatures are, there's some people that say that they can be seen in the Battle of the Five Armies being used by Azog, although they're going by a different name. Azog calls them the Earth Eaters. Up next, we have Tolkien's illustrations. This entry speaks for itself. It refers to the drawings that J.R.R. had made for The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings series. I'll throw a couple up on screen right here. I'll try to get a little collage of them, seeing as they rival some of the ones that I've seen that have been made for the book since. I honestly think that these might even be better than the ones that I've already seen. Not only does this show that he's a very talented writer, which I often hold is one of the best writers in history, but it also showed that he was very talented whenever drawing and painting, especially landscape designs. There's also some of drawings of paper and writing. I'll put this one up here. It's a script that he had drawn. Some more would be like the early concepts of the Shire of the Hobbits and the Doors of Durin. He also used his own knowledge of philology to create his own sort of calligraphy style. This calligraphy being the engravings that are on the inside of the ring, and it is also part of the Tengwar script that he had also created himself. Up next, we have Wagner. This is a very controversial topic, but it refers to the similarities between Wagner's The Ring Cycle and J.R.'s The Lord of the Rings. Seeing as they both drew on Nordic mythology for their stories, it's very easy to see how they could be comparable. They both drew on the Norse mythology of Sigurd. This is why their stories have a lot of the same themes, and they also end off in the same way. They both end in a very holistic way, seeing as it circles around back to itself being normal again. Seeing as how after in both stories, after their quest is done, everything kind of returns back to normal. They also both play very heavily on the thought of greed overtaking someone through a ring, which I thought was very cool, seeing as two stories that were kind of similar both had a very core part to them, seeing as it being the one ring. Although they both play on this theme of a ring, this is kind of where the similarities stop, and plagiarism cannot be drawn from this. Seeing as the ring is more of just a plot device, after this, their stories divulge from each other. And it is stated that after they divulge from each other, that's where the similarities end from an artistic standpoint, leaving it at just two stories that were both inspired by Sigurd, but are also very different in their own ways. Up next, we have The Battle of Middle-earth. The Battle of Middle-earth is a real-time strategy game that is based in the world of Lord of the Rings. This game was made by a company called Danger Close Games. This producer also made titles such as Medal of Honor and Command & Conquer. Command & Conquer being another real-time strategy-based game. It was then published by EA and put on many PC platforms. I don't believe it was ever brought to Xbox though. This game shares many playstyle similarities and even graphical similarities to Age of Empires and the aforementioned Command & Conquer. All three games having the same exact playstyle of gather resources, build up an army with those resources, and then you'd fight another army in real time with this massive force. This game was very well received, even winning multiple awards. In 2005, I believe it was awarded by 3 different companies of being the best strategy real-time game of the year. However, after the expiration of the Lord of the Rings video game license, they had to systematically shut down every server for this game. The last server being shut down, I believe, in 2010. Although the servers had been shut down, there are a lot of people that play the game by themselves in the campaign mode, seeing as you can still get into it to this day. And with that, we're going to round off the second tier of the Lord of the Rings Iceberg. I hope you all enjoyed. I know I certainly had a good time making this. I love writing for these, like I said in the last video. This is a very great way for me to pass time, and it's also a very big hobby of mine. So I'm very glad that you stuck around to the end. Leave some comments, let me know what I could do better. And as always, thank you very much for watching. And I believe that's it for this one. Make sure to watch out for the next video. It should be coming out soon. I'm probably already working on it as this one is posted. And with that being said, Thank you again for watching, and hope you have a good one. Bye.